Welcome to Oberon's Occult. On tonight's episode, I bring you 3 stories of the darker side of the Fae. I do hope you enjoy. The Fae by Tal Acanthracia, 4759. In a time that predated history, there were 4 apex predators. Humans were the lowest of all 4. Dracos, large, winged creatures that vaguely resembled the dragon's fold, although much more animalistic. They could range in sizes from being about the same size of a house cat to monstrous in size, some larger than the Empire State Building. Now they are preserved in stone, masquerading as many dinosaurs from the land to the sea. There were Ferals, a human-like race that was significantly more muscular and magically gifted than humans. Some towered over adult males, while others were nearly 11 foot in height. They created and destroyed with their abilities and despised humans more than the Dracos. Nowadays, they stay put far away from civilization, hidden away. Finally, there were Fae. You're probably thinking about small, beautiful creatures that flit around the forests, making flower crowns and little houses for animals. Those are fairies, an offshoot race of the Fae. Fae aren't Tinker Bell or the Tooth Fairy. Fae were monsters that lived in forests, often leading humans away to their deaths. They would call out like sirens from the forest edge, and once you noticed that the immense beauty looked flawed, it was too late. Beauty is easy to imitate, but harder to create. Once you notice 2 sharp teeth, disproportionate limbs, elongated torsos, it was too late to turn back. When the sharp, often broken horns appeared, along with razor-sharp claws and pale eyes, it was all over for you. The last thing you would likely see were the insect mandibles that emerged from their faces. Oftentimes, the Fae would leave behind the flesh of their victims for the other species, and instead use their inhuman strength and serpent-like tongues to snap open the bones and suck the marrow from the insides. Luckily, the Fae are magically contained within a forest far enough from any human life to pose a threat. I would take second looks at the fossils in museums and recreations of the ancient people, as they might be nothing that humans have ever discovered before. Just hope that you never meet a Fae, for it will be the last thing you expect. The Family Farm by Kenneth 0505. Being the oldest child, Mark knew he would end up with the family property. He just didn't know it would be this soon. His father's health had been going downhill, so he moved his wife and kids back to the old homestead. It was a massive decision, but he wanted to make sure his dad was receiving the proper care he needed. Of course, his siblings didn't offer. They only cared about themselves. They would be no help. With all the change and the stress of this move, Mark decided to take a walk into the woods to clear his head. He had always loved this place. His home sweet home was a 500-acre piece of heaven nestled in the Ozarks. If he hadn't been so ready to experience the world, he probably would have never left. He knew this place better than himself. He knew every fallen tree, every rock face, every spring. However, after 30 minutes of walking, he stumbled on something he had never seen before. A cabin. The sight of the old cabin shocked him to his core. He had walked this particular trail hundreds of times. This cabin wasn't here before. It couldn't have been here before. As he stepped onto the porch, he could tell it was old, but it wasn't in bad shape. The old iron latch slid easy and the door opened wide. It was a humble home with 3 rooms. The main room consisted of a fireplace and a wood-cook stove. There were 2 empty rooms on both sides of the living area he assumed were bedrooms. He was surprised he hadn't run face first into a spider's web yet. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. He didn't see any cobwebs in the corners. The house was empty except for the old cook stove and a beautiful antique table with a book on it laying in front of the captain's chair.
The table and book didn't have the first hint of dust on them. That's strange, he thought to himself. He sat down in the chair, curiosity getting the better of him. He opened the book and realized it was a diary. Even though he felt wrong, he couldn't help but read at least one entry. June 6th, 1806. Pa is worried the livestock ain't gonna make it. The trip was rough and they aren't acting right. He's starting to regret buying this piece of property. My objection fell on his deaf ears. Of course he wouldn't listen to a girl, even if I am his only child. Ma is sick. She's ate up with consumption. I wish we had never left Virginia. After reading this, he couldn't walk away. June 8th, 1806. If things don't change, we won't have anything left. Majority of our livestock is dead or has went missing. The rocky ground ain't fit for growing crops, and Ma ain't been out of bed for 2 days. I don't got time to write because there's so much that needs done around here. My God, Mark whispered to himself. What an awful situation. I have to know how they dealt with it. So he continued. June 18th, 1806. Today was an odd but wonderful day. I was awakened by Pa's screams for Ma. She had vanished, and after hours of searching, we had all but given up. However, Ma came strutting in like she had never been sick at all. It was a miracle. It is so nice to have her back. I've missed her so. June 22nd, 1806. It seems our struggles are over. After Ma got better, all our livestock that had vanished found their way back. The crops have found new life in this rocky ground. God has smiled down on us for sure. The only thing eating at me, I swear I can see something in the trees. Pa says it's all in my head and that I shouldn't just be glad things are finally working out. It's probably just stress. July 1st, 1806. Everything is better than could be expected. I'm still seeing the shadows moving in the trees, but I quit bringing it up to Pa, though. He's starting to question my sanity. I'm glad we aren't in Virginia anymore. He would have me committed, especially for what I've told him about Ma. I heard her talking to herself, saying, I can't do it, over and over. The only look she gives me is one of sorrow. I'm just so confused. July 7th, 1806. We have a problem. It started with the squirrels and the rabbits. They started circling the house single file. That was early morning. By midday, the deer and coyotes had joined. By this evening, the bears and the wildcats followed suit. They ain't trying to attack us. Pa stepped out to scare them off. They flat out ignored him. I don't think there'll be much sleep tonight. What the hell kind of diary is this? Mark thought to himself. This has got to be some kind of prank. He put the diary down and started to walk away. But there was a nagging in him. He had to know what happened. He walked back over and sat back down. July 8th, 1806. These critters are walking on 2 legs like men, and more have joined through the night. I'm so scared. It's now on dinner time, and they've started howling, growling, and screeching together in a pattern, almost like singing a church hymnal. I feel like it's going to be another long night. July 9th, 1806. The god-forsaken chanting from these damn animals is so loud it feels like the cabin is vibrating. Pa tried to get through them and got hurt real bad. It's the strangest thing, though. It wasn't from one of the hell beasts, as we started calling them. As soon as he stepped out, something we couldn't see picked him up and threw him back into the cabin. We heard an awful snap, and his legs were twisted at the knees. I'm not sure how much more we can take. We lost Pa a few hours after I last wrote, but he didn't pass from his injuries. The chanting got even louder after he had tried to get out. All I know is Pa let out a chilling scream and blood poured from his ears. Then he was gone. Ma is in a daze. I can't say that I blame her. July 10th, 1806. I should stop writing this, but I figure if I die, I want someone to know what happened here. Ma's mind is gone. She keeps apologizing to Pa's lifeless body, saying it's all her fault. I finally hit my breaking point and screamed at her. I told her she needs to get a grip and help me figure out what to do. That's when she told me she had made a deal with something she couldn't see. She said she had summoned a creature most awful. In exchange for her health and prosperity with Pa, she'd give me up. Her mind is broken. The old world nonsense is just that. Nonsense. It's gotten quiet. I'm just scared to look outside. I think I'm gonna try to sleep this evening. I'll figure a way out in the morning. July 11th, 1806. This morning there was a knock at the door. I answered it hoping this nightmare was over. In the doorway there was a tall, handsome fellow about my age. I rushed him into the cabin, quickly looking to see if the hell beasts were anywhere. "They're gone, lass," said the man in an accent similar to Ma's. He turned to Ma and she let out a scream. He cackled in response. "You thought you could skip out on our deal, huh? Well, as you can see, we don't really like being taken advantage of." Ma went to scream, but was cut short when the pale devil ripped her tongue out of her mouth and began to chew on it. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned towards me, and what was said between us will remain between us, unless it concerns your fate. If so, this conversation will be revealed at the appointed time. After that last entry, Mark threw the diary against the wall and sat there in awe. He was trying to wrap his head around this bizarre journal, finding this weird cabin, and wondering if he was losing his mind. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "I see you found the old homestead, and your great-great-grandma Kate's diary." Confused, he asked, "What's going on here, Dad? I've walked this trail 1,000,000 times and never seen this cabin here." His dad couldn't meet his eyes as he began revealing the disturbing truth of their family. "Son, everything in that diary was real. Everything is revealed to you now because you have to carry on this curse. All the prosperity that I have had, you will now have. You have to bring the creature your firstborn." All the air had been sucked out of the room. "The hell I will. You have lost your mind. I'm not giving up any of my kids. This isn't real, Pops. I'm your firstborn, and I'm standing right in front of you. You didn't give me up." His health was worse than he thought. Maybe he had undiagnosed schizophrenia. "You had an older brother," he said, as tears welled up in his eyes. "When the cabin appeared to me, my father and I had this same conversation." "Bullshit," Mark explained. "Son, please calm down and listen. The Fae folk struck a deal with Kate. On top of money and success, any evidence of the firstborn will be erased. No one will remember them except for you." Mark just stared in disbelief. He knew his father's health was deteriorating, but he never figured it would mess with his mind this much. He softened his voice and suggested to his father, "Let's get you home, Pops. You really need to rest." As he walked towards the old man, a cackle came from one of the empty rooms, and there stood the pale man himself. Kate had him pegged. He is a handsome fella, pale skin and light hair, but what she failed to mention was the milky white eyes. Mark jumped in front of his father and squared off, ready to fight. The Fey man just laughed even louder. "What are you going to do, lad?" he quizzed Mark. He started to speak when the pale man cut him off. "Everything he told you is true. When your ancestors' old homestead appears, it's time to pay the debt that is owed." Mark couldn't believe this was happening. and the Fey man continued.
You seem like a good man. You're probably thinking you can find another way to break your family's deal, but that is why new generation finds the diary. You read it, so you learn what will happen if you don't pay.
Mark's eyes welled up with tears. He knew he could beat this somehow. He just had to find a way. The Fey man spoke again.
I've seen that look before, and if you don't bring me what is owed tonight, I'm gonna have myself a little fun with your wife, make you watch as I peel the hide from her and feed it to your children.
After that, he vanished. As Mark helped his father back home, he made his decision. He would run with his family and never look back. There was no way he would give his child over to that pale devil. Every curse can be broken. There was always a loophole. He just had to find it, and find it quick. His eyes popped open, and he very warily sat up in bed. The one thing his poor old dad forgot to mention about the curse is the guilt in dream form. He didn't try to run like he wanted to, and the guilt of that eats at him every morning when he wakes, and since his wife passed away last June, his health had been going downhill. He had been checking the trail once a week. He checked for the old homestead to appear. 3 weeks ago, it showed up, and Mark knew what needed to be done. His son will be moved in by the end of the week. It's time to pass down the farm to the next generation.
The Banshee by Daz123D. I am thankfully typing this on my laptop, not using paper, as I'm sure my tears would make it unusable. You see, it's because of what I heard last night that stirred the memory inside me of when I was a young boy of maybe 7. Somehow, the very sound of her screams, her keening and lamenting, brought the memory to light as if it were yesterday and over 50 years have passed. You wonder how is it possible to forget such traumatic events, but the mind protects itself, and frankly, I guess that's precisely what mine did, or had done until now. I guess I'll tell it as I remember it, and how it has followed our family since well before I was a soul in this world, and many before me who bore the name O'Brien. It was a winter's morning as I slipped on my slippers and comfy dressing gown and shuffled downstairs. My mammy hadn't a chance to say a word. Neither had I the sense to notice the bags beneath her eyes and the pale, solemn expression on her face. Those damn cats were crying and fighting outside all night. I didn't get a wink of sleep, I barked. Why can't Daddy just shoot them or set traps? Because if I have to listen to that shite again, I'll... Stop it there now, young lad, or it will be the belt you get, my father ordered from behind the daily paper. Leave your mother be and get yourself some breakfast before school. It was only then I realized how shook and tired my man looked. Are you all right, Ma? I whispered. I'll be grand. Get yourself breakfast and be off with ya. And wrap up well, she said while rubbing my hair as Mammy does. I quickly ate my cereal and ran upstairs, but knowing something was up, I sneakily as a young boy of 7 could, made it halfway back down the stairs and listened through the hallway. It will be okay, Mary. Like the boy said, it was probably just the cats. Dad hushed reassuringly. I know that sound, Tom. I've heard it twice now already, and I know what it means. She's back, and God only knows for who this time. My mom broke down into tears, and my dad cuddled her and held her face pressed to his chest in an attempt to muffle her cries or comfort her. Maybe both, I'm not quite sure. I snuck back upstairs, not understanding, not knowing, and head spinning with questions a boy my age would never get answers to. I wrapped up in my winter coat and hat and grabbed my bag and lunch and made for the door. My mam nowhere in sight. See you later, son, my da muttered, as he watched my eyes search for mam. She's in the bathroom. I'll let her know you're off, lad. I nodded and closed the door. I don't remember much of school that day. But I do remember thinking all day about who this woman was and what on earth could she want with one of us or someone we knew. Why on earth was Mammy so shaken in terror, so pale and scared? Nothing made sense to my childish mind, and before long I had become engrossed in games and school's usual antics. It being winter, it was gloomy and gray when I arrived around 4 p.m., and a steady drizzle had fallen all day long, a normal Irish winter's evening. The atmosphere at home was much similar. Gloomy gray, and it felt like many tears had fallen for most of the day. We ate in silence, and after a movie about nothing that interesting, my da ushered me to bed far earlier than usual. Looking back, I didn't see much of Ma at all that day, other than at dinner, and any time she did appear it was in a flash. If not in a flash, her back was to me, or she quickly turned away. With age, I realize now she was hiding her tears, just like the ones I am crying tonight, and hiding her pain and growing fear as well as grief. I lay in bed wondering about the woman and hoping Ma would be okay. Thinking of school and Damien telling Sarah I liked her. God, I wanted to punch Damien. I didn't even like Sarah. It's funny the memories that come back as one ages. They all seem to unravel, and one is attached to another, and so on. I twitched and jerked about in bed, my mind not allowing rest to come easy. That's when I heard it. That's when I heard her. In the distance, I could just barely make out a cry. The curious child I was, I quietly opened my window and sat up in bed listening intently. The room was black as night, and the wind carried the cries on the gentle breeze. It was coming from the field opposite our house. The sound stopped, and I sat in silence, fueled by adrenaline, curiosity, and a little bit of fear. I swear in those few moments in that house you could have heard a pin drop. The scream that came made me jump a little in bed and made my heart begin to race. I really regretted my decision in opening the window, as it sounded right outside. It was the sound of a woman moaning in horror and shrieking that made every part of my body shiver in terror. All the hairs on my arms and neck stood on end. My eyes wide in darkness, afraid to even blink. I was afraid to breathe. Was she here for me? I hadn't realized it yet, but tears were rolling down my cheeks, and I was holding my blanket tighter and tighter, the louder the screaming got. If you imagine the sound a woman would make if she had just given birth, and her baby was ripped from her arms and flung into a general waste bin as she lay unable to move, unable due to the pain of labor and the loss of her child. If you can imagine the screams of a woman in pain like that, well, you are not even close to the pain this woman's roars and screams emanated. It was the sound of death itself. Then, as quickly as she came, she left and all lay silent. Our home stayed quiet as none of us within dared to move, but through the walls I could just about hear my mother's cries. I slept somehow soon after, with the winter's breeze gently blowing the curtains beneath my window, because closing the window was out of the question because of the fear. I woke up the next morning and dragged myself to the kitchen and slumped on a chair at the dining table. Noticing my unusual and dull, saddened behavior, my mom softly asked, "You sleep okay, son?" She smiled, but her eyes, they didn't. "No," I mumbled. "I heard a woman crying outside my window. It wasn't cats," and my dad quickly cut me off. "It was probably a woman lost wandering about trying to find her way home. Don't be worrying about those things, son." My mom rushed out of the room and upstairs, and Dad quickly followed. I left for school without breakfast, and with a faint goodbye shouted upstairs as my parents seemed to argue amongst themselves about something. At least it was Friday, I thought. No school tomorrow. and Mark and I can go explore down by the streams and catch frogs and minnows and bring them back to our barn. We had quite the collection gathered. It was like our very own wildlife reserve, and we loved it. When I got home, my Uncle Pete was there, and I was told to go watch TV as the grown-ups talk, and that I could eat in front of the TV. This really is going to be a great weekend, I thought. Uncle Pete lived in Kildare, about an hour away. I didn't see him much, but he always put a crisp 5-pound note in my pocket, so I loved it when he came. Mark and I had money for chippers tomorrow now, I thought, smirking in at Uncle Pete through the midday doors as he gave me the nod of his hat. I gobbled up my dinner and watched as many cartoons as possible before the remote was savagely taken from me by my father. On to bed with you now, boy. You have had long enough. Okay, fine, I said with a little too much attitude. I'll give you fine, my dad gestured with a fist, but a quick run from my Uncle Pete and a laugh from them all. I was upstairs and soon followed by Mammy. She tucked me in, which was a little unusual, but not uncommon. I was only starting to get embarrassed by it, but secretly still loved it. She kissed my forehead and said, "Get to sleep early now, okay?" She whispered, "I love you," and closed the door as she left. Today was a good day, I remember thinking, while I lay there planning the weekend ahead, especially now that I was 5 pounds richer. God, 5 pounds was a lot days, that's for sure. Mark and I will be like noblemen or royalty this weekend. We will live like kings. I drifted off, probably smiling at the plans I had made. Little did I know then that God laughs at man's plans. I was awoken at what must have been 1 a.m. by the deathly howls and screams of the woman that had somehow become a distant memory. The sound was so loud I couldn't hear myself think. Fueled by adrenaline and panic, I ripped open the curtains. It took my eyes a second as they were still adjusting to the darkness, but then I saw her. At the corner of the fence leading to the lane up to our doorstep. A child's estimate in my aging memory puts her about 50 feet from the house. I froze in fear from the moment I saw her, and I believe we locked eyes to this day. She crouched down, arms wrapped around herself as she moaned, mouth constantly open and never stopping to take a breath. She stood back up, pointed directly at me, and let out the most horrifying sound I had ever heard. I ran back to my bed, somehow remembering I had legs, and dived beneath the safety of the blankets. Like a soldier in a trench, I lay awaiting the oncoming, unstoppable doom. I imagined her tapping on my window, and the gaping hole that was her mouth swallowing me whole. Then again, everything grew silent, and no one in the home dared to move. I still hadn't closed my curtains, and was debating it in my head when the phone rang. I heard my mother's wails and screams before my father even answered it. She knew what the news would be, but the question was who, and she soon got her answer. It was my auntie, and she was screaming, crying too, as I heard my dog trying to calm her on the phone. So much went on that night, amongst the screams, the moans, my auntie arriving, the police not long after. I guess I'll make it as short as possible. Uncle Pete was in an accident shortly after leaving our house, and he had died on impact. There was no other vehicle involved, and at the time they believed it was a heart attack, and that later proved true. I overheard my mammy having a conversation with 2 other relatives days later about the moaning woman, and I finally heard her name for the first time. The Banshee, or Banshee. As I now know, she can go by many names and follows many families. The native Irish call her Banshee, or Banshee, or the most used term for her is Banshee. My mom, unfortunately, has encountered her 3 times now and has told me years after this event of all its horrors and how the family copes and has coped in the past. All are one and the same. and all are harbingers of death. Some believe they are immortal, the race of the Fae, kindly warning us to prepare for the death of a loved one. Some believe they are here to guide spirits to the other side. Then you get to the darker lore and tales, and I'd rather not go there tonight. You see, the reason this is so fresh in my memory is because last night I heard her cry in the darkness, and as soon as I heard it, I remembered it all in an instant. I awoke a couple of hours ago to her screaming, even closer to my house. The sound making me feel like that little boy hiding in his room. If hell has a sound, she certainly makes it. For the past 2 nights she has came to visit, crying louder and louder each night. The grief in her cries tonight brought tears to mine, for I now know why she weeps and laments the way she does. It's to keep evil away and to let us know a sadness is coming. Like my mam all those years ago when the phone rang, she already knew the message but simply asked who. Tonight, I sit alone with my laptop knowing she will visit me one last time and cry her cries for someone I love. I'm too scared to call my mam or call my dad. I'm simply awaiting the inevitable and the unstoppable. Sleep simply eludes me, and the sun has started to rise outside. As sure as the sun will rise, it shall go down, and the banshee shall cry her final moans. Her final tears shall hit the soil, and then I'll simply wait for what's to come. No man can stop the hands of time, and no man can escape the message she carries, even if they close their eyes and cover their ears with all their strength. When she cries, the soul must follow.